Dan Clayton of Salt City Hoops now joins us here to talk about Jazz basketball, recap their win over the Pacers. Dan, how we doing? Oh, Dan, you got us?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
My devices are arguing with each other.
Yeah, that's usually how
always fun.
Yeah, well,
it's like us in the studio. We're always arguing with each other.
Okay, calm down. Dan, big win for the Utah Jazz after the loss of Mitchell. What stood out to you the most about how the Jazz were able to rally from a 17-point deficit and win this game?
Yeah, defense mostly. I mean, Rudy Gobert was ridiculous in the second half of that game. Domantas Sabonis had really, he'd gotten the best of Rudy a couple times in that matchup in the early part of the game, and Rudy is the type of he's the type of basketball sociopath, and I mean that in the best way possible. Who, like, when you eat his lunch a little bit, he's gonna take that personally, and he's gonna come back and he's gonna want to get you back. And he certainly shut Sabonis down in the third quarter, and then even into the fourth quarter, you just saw Sabonis kind of being afraid to do some of the same things with the basketball that he had tried earlier in the game because of how consistently Rudy had shut him down after halftime, and that really gummed up Indiana's offense because so much of their offense does move through the all-star big man. So, really, I think it was just the stinginess of Utah on defense that even gave them a chance to be in a game that, frankly, they had no business being in, having been down by 17 points early and then by 13 at the half. It's kind of amazing that they were in position to win that game at all, and especially that they wound up winning by, a margin of, I think, 8 or 10 points. Eight. So, it was mostly just the way they turned it around on the defensive end.
So, you don't know how long Donovan's going to be out just yet. He's got another MRI. Not another. He's got an MRI scheduled. He already had X-rays. But he's going to miss some time. We know that. We don't know how much time. How does this team? Looking at the games ahead, how does this team move forward without Donovan in the lineup or the short term?
Yeah, that's the question, man. So the Jazz have this baseball series against LA. They have consecutive games against the Lakers tomorrow afternoon and then again on Monday evening. The good news for the Jazz is that after those games, and remember that LeBron James is still out for those Laker games, and Anthony Davis is doubtful to return for either of those Jazz games. So they'll face a starless, or worst case scenario, a one-star LA team. And then after that, they have exactly 3 games left against teams with a winning record. They have home games against Portland and Denver, and they have 1 visit back down to Phoenix. So the rest of their games should be pretty winnable games. So I still think that Utah has a pretty good chance. They have the inside lane on holding on to that top seed, even with a Donovan Mitchell injury. But obviously, if he's going to miss any real length of time, then that does affect championship odds, right? Like, this is a year that the Jazz were poised to go into the playoffs thinking like they had a shot, right? Like, they're not favorites, but that's because this particular year, nobody's a favorite. There are, 4 teams in the West after the Jamal Murray injury in Denver. Depending on how real you think Phoenix is, there are 4 teams in the West that believe they have a real shot. There's 3.5 teams in the East that think they have a real shot. The Jazz are in that group of, 7 or 8 title contenders. And, if they do have to be without Donovan Mitchell for a long stretch of time, then they have to really reinvent a lot of things. They have to completely rethink their rotation, because right now what they're doing with staggering the 3 All-Stars and, letting Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley sub back in and kind of go beat up on bench units, that only works because they have Donovan Mitchell and because Donovan is as good as he is, and he can carry that sort of hybrid bench unit that helps them bridge from the starting lineup to when Mike and Rudy check back in. So, who knows if that's still going to be available to them while they wait for Donovan to get healthy. And, obviously, as you mentioned, Eric, at this point, we don't know if that waiting process is, a few days, a week, a couple of weeks, or, a month or more. We'll just have to wait for more from the Jazz's medical team.
Well, and I think as a follow-up to that, this is a discussion we've been having this week, is really how important is it to still have that number one seed? We're seeing teams in the East, other teams purposely resting their players. They don't seem to really care about their seed as long as they're healthy for the playoffs. Is it a similar situation for the Jazz, or is that number one seed really important for Utah?
No, I think in the Western Conference, it's really important this particular year. And the reason I say that is because, again, you've got 5 really, really good teams in the West. Probably the Jamal Murray injury takes Denver out of being real title contenders. I mean, they still, I guess, are there with a puncher's chance in the sense of if an opponent turned an ankle at the wrong time or whatever. But, you've got LA, Utah, Phoenix, and Denver as sort of the first tier when everybody's healthy. Then you've got, at 6 and 7, you've got Portland and Dallas, 2 really good teams who are led by all NBA level superstars. And then you've got a big gap between 7 and 8. So I think that this is a year where it really does matter to be number one because, if you're the number one seed, you're going to face, Memphis or San Antonio instead of facing Portland or Dallas. Also, I think it might also just matter from a standpoint of momentum, right? The Jazz have held that number one seed since early February, and I think it is kind of a point of pride and a point of mental momentum to say, look, there have been some up and downs, honestly, but if you can look at your teammates and say, hey, we've dominated the league this year, I think that mentally is worth something and emotionally worth something going into the playoffs. But, again, what's worth more than that? Having your guys healthy and especially having a star like Donovan Mitchell healthy. So they'll obviously make smart decisions about the long term of both, this year's title chances, but also Donovan's future and the team's future. But I think if they can get him back and, try to capitalize on this opportunity and cash in on all their great play up to this point, that's put them in a position to be 42-14 with 16 games left and to have a shot at making some noise in the postseason.
People have been blaming the Jazz schedule, and I've been going against that fault, that the schedule is what it is. You get injured if you get injured. Would you agree to the schedule that it has been a little bit grilling, or you not believe that argument?
I do. So, we know that factually the season has been compressed because they're trying to fit in 72 games in a shortened calendar because, they couldn't start until they felt like they had a handle on their COVID protocols and until the nation's numbers, frankly, were in a place where it was even safe to put, 50 people in a gym together at minimum. So, that's factual. Now, I don't know enough to say that Jamal Murray's injury wouldn't have happened if he'd played one fewer game in the previous 7 nights, right? It's basketball. So sometimes guys get injured. It sucks. It's a bummer that we don't get to see Jamal Murray follow up on last year's amazing playoff performance. But I'm not sure that we can necessarily, from our comfortable sofas, make the determination that it was because of one thing or another thing. What I will say, though, is that obviously, we know because of all the advanced, the way science has advanced around understanding our bodies and the whole kinetic chain, is that, if you're playing on a sore ankle, then your knee's at risk. And if you're playing on a sore knee, then your hip's at risk. And if, just that everything's connected in the body. And, I think that's what a lot of players are trying to get us to understand is this idea that it's not about the number of games. It's about the lack of recovery time and the lack of time to get yourself whole before the next time that you got to go out and play, a back-to-back or play 4 games in 6 nights or something like that. So, I don't pretend to know because I'm not a professional athlete and I'm not a doctor or an orthopedist. But at the end of the day, it is a season where we've seen more games compressed into a shorter span. I think not to go on here, Ajay, but Tim McMahon of ESPN tweeted some figures that he was quite obviously fed from the league office, who was doing a little bit of damage control. But they basically pointed out that I don't remember the specific numbers, but it was something like this year teams are averaging 3.6 games per week instead of 3.4 games per week. So it is more. It's not crazy more. It's not like such a difference that you go, man, how are these guys like able to walk down the street? But, obviously if the players are telling us that it's impacted them, then we should listen, and we should, try to have some empathy and understanding of what they're going through and why this is a season where rest has been so important to so many teams.
Dan Clayton with Salt City Hoops, and talking about the Utah Jazz. And Dan, this, I guess this NBA race to the finish line here, just how many games left? 15, 20?
16 for the Jazz, as many as 20 for the Spurs, but somewhere in that range for just about everybody.
So for the Jazz to maintain that top spot, I mean, a quick guess estimate, what's their record need to be in that 15 or 16 game span?
Yeah, I think that they're pretty comfortable because they're back to having a full game and a half lead over Phoenix after today's win. A full game, I should say. No, it's a game and a half. My bad. Yeah, game and a half over Phoenix. The difference is that Phoenix has a bunch of tough games left. Phoenix has...
They go on a brutal East Coast road trip here, right?
They do, yeah. So they have 7 games left against teams that have the best 10 records in the league. Utah only has 5, and 2 of them they'll play this weekend against the wounded Lakers. On the other end of the spectrum, the Jazz have 8 games left against the bottom 10 teams, and Phoenix only has 2 of those types of games, and they're both on the road. So, we could go through, there are a lot of different ways to measure strength of schedule, but if you look at the basic thing, which is just the average record of their remaining opponents, the Jazz will face, on average from here on out, teams that are 449 in winning percentage, and Phoenix will face teams that are 554 in winning percentage. So that's a pretty large gap. So Utah realistically probably just needs to find a way to get to like 52 or 53 wins, which would be another 10 or 11 out of the remaining 16. And, I think that's doable. Although, again, a lot of it depends on how much time they're without Donovan Mitchell and how they can do in games like the 2 coming up against LA.
I want to ask about Rudy Gobert in the MVP race. Look, if it's the Lakers, the Bucks, the Sixers, the Miami Heat, then it's their best player in a clear runaway for the MVP award. But because it's the Utah Jazz, they can't sniff even the top 5. Give me your thoughts on, like, if you had to play the devil's advocate of why Rudy Gobert is not in consideration for the MVP award, it would be...
Well, I think what's tough about the Jazz is that they don't have a quote-unquote traditional superstar, right? Like, even among the fan base, I think that you find differing opinions on, is the real engine behind their success Rudy Gobert's defense and presence as a role man, or is it Donovan Mitchell's creation and shooting and scoring? So, I think that that's one of the things that makes it tough, is that there's a little bit of one siphoning votes off from the other. Frankly, I think that if you look at advanced measures, things like, 538, the forecasting website, they have a metric called Raptor, in which Rudy Gobert literally ranks in the top 3 in the league. There's a website called bballindex.com that has a metric called LeBron, and Rudy Gobert leads the league in that metric. And again, these are just kind of all-in metrics that people have designed to use a combination of box score data and how a team performs while players on the court versus off to try to approximate their overall value. And because metrics like that, just see the impact that he's had on the Jazz from a scoreboard perspective, those metrics would say that it's crazy to not at least have Rudy Gobert on your MVP ballot. Maybe he's not in the first spot on ballots, but that he should be somewhere on these voters forms when they send them in. I don't think it'll play out that way. I think he'll get some token votes, but I really think that the award is Nikola Jokic's to lose this year, especially if the Nuggets are able to keep their momentum going and keep their foot on the pedal with this Jamal Murray injury news.
Dan, last question for me, and you've already kind of alluded to this. The Jazz will need to change a little bit philosophically how they approach offensively and defensively their opponents without Donovan Mitchell in the lineup. So who in your mind will need to step up to play a larger role, to have a bigger impact until he comes back?
Well, so it's funny because, I think when you talk about offense, there are scorers and there are shot creators. And what's tough for the Jazz is that Donovan Mitchell is really the one guy who's both things, right? Like Jordan Clarkson can go out and get his own shot anytime he wants, right? And he can score with moderate efficiency. He can go eat possessions and score a bunch of points and whatever. But he's not a guy you want running your offense for lengthy periods of time because he's not a shot creator. He's not like a facilitator. Mike Conley and Joe Ingles are facilitators. They are guys who you want running the offense, but they're not guys that you can just say, all right, go find a way to score 13 points in this quarter and get in. So I think that's what's a little complicated, is that the Jazz aren't going to be able to just turn to one player and say, hey, go out and be the new Donovan Mitchell. I think to your point, they're going to have to restructure themselves a little bit philosophically and say, hey, at times we're going to have to be okay with Jordan Clarkson or Bojan Bogdanovic just like getting up shots. And there are other times where we're going to be methodical and we're going to have, some half-court pick-and-roll offense facilitated by Conley and Ingles and, hope that produces, some advantage basketball. And I think it's going to have to be a blend of those things. They just don't have a guy who really can fill both of those roles. And then, just to say nothing of, like I mentioned before, their rotation is going to have to change. They can't do with their rotation what they've been doing for these previous 56 games, because that has worked for them, because Donovan is capable of carrying that sort of that interstitial group that carries the team for a few minutes while Rudy and Mike get rests, because Rudy and Mike have been running 3 stints per half. And I'm not sure they can continue to do that if there's no Donovan to keep the team afloat in those minutes, unless Bogey or someone like that just goes crazy over the last 16 games or whatever portion of those Donovan misses.
Dan, from a national perspective, I've been saying that the Lakers are just kind of playing on the playground until it gets serious, and then when the guys get healthy, all hell's going to break loose.
Maybe.
I mean, with this, when LeBron and AD get healthy, do the Lakers really care where they get seated, because they know when they get their full complementary guys back and they're all healthy that they're going to run the table? Or, I mean, where's your thought process with them?
Well, so here's what I'd say about LA. Like, their defense is real, and their defense has held up even while the guys have been out, right? Even without LeBron and AD, they've been guarding really well. They've got good depth from a defensive perspective. Now, again, they don't have a lot of ways to generate offense, so that's what they've really been missing with those guys out, and that's why they've basically been a 500 team since LeBron hurt himself in that Atlanta game. Once they do get healthy, I do think they will vault right back to being most people's favorite or co-favorite to come out of the West. I think where it gets a little dicey is, remember that LeBron James is 36, and he's amazing. The guy is amazing. He's a savant. He's an incredible athlete. He's doing things at age 36 that haven't been done at that age since like Karl. And honestly, even Karl didn't like perform at this level if you look at the full statistical contribution. But when a 36-year-old, and I say, like, hey, I'm 41, so like I understand. I'm speaking from personal experience here. If I didn't play basketball for 2 months and then suddenly came back and just expected myself to be at the same level, like sometimes the human body can't just flip that switch anymore when you're in your upper 30s and beyond. And so I think we have to see first, like, how LeBron looks when he gets back and if he needs some time to sort of shake the rust off. And, that's less true for AD because he's younger. But let's remember that AD's thing was like a lower calf / Achilles. Like, those injuries can be tough for guys from an explosion standpoint. So I think we need to see how they look before we schedule any parades. But, obviously they're probably going to be the road team in every series they play this offseason or this postseason, and that matters too. But, let's say they line up across from Denver without Jamal Murray, and in the second round they're playing at Utah, and if they make it to the conference finals, they're playing at the Clippers or at the Suns. Like, those are 3 tough series. So I do think that, they can't just expect to magically find it. They're going to have to really focus on getting those guys back to their peak levels or near their peak levels. And I just don't know that that's as automatic a thing after a long-term injury at that age. But, again, the dude is special, and he's made a career out of making people like me look stupid for doubting him. So we'll see what happens.
Well, Dan, it's always great stuff. Always appreciate the insight. You always do your homework and bring great takes on the show. We appreciate your time today, especially after a really interesting game. And we didn't even get a chance to talk about the impact of Dwayne Wade as an owner.
No, not at all.
Really impacts the game that much, but maybe in future years. But we do appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on and telling us a little bit more about your thoughts about the Utah Jazz.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, thanks, fellas.
Again, Dan Clayton, Salt City Hoops,
the
always
aficionado
great stuff.
himself. He is incredible, and we'll be having him on in the near future, especially when we get to playoff time.